The rain came sideways in March, turning Iris Kovač's 42 acres into something that looked like a wound. Red clay slurry poured through the gullies, carrying what little topsoil remained straight into the creek below. The county soil conservationist stood at the edge of the worst ravine and shouted over the storm. "You need terracing, rock barriers, minimum $30,000 in infrastructure. Where you need to sell." Iris held a mason jar filled with sunflower seeds and said nothing. 11 weeks earlier, the estate sale in Yamhill County, Oregon took place on December 3, 2023, starting at 9 a.m. in a barn that smelled like old hay and motor oil. Iris Kovač, 26 years old, stood in the back while neighbors picked through her grandfather's tools, furniture, and life. The farm itself, Property 051-089-142, 42 acres on a steep hillside, wasn't part of the sale. That had come to her directly through the will, along with $17,000 in debt secured against the land, a 1991 Ford pickup with 200,000 miles, and a metal lockbox her grandfather's lawyer handed her with specific instructions. He said to open this only after everyone else had left. The farm hadn't produced a commercial crop in 8 years. Steep slope, red clay soil, erosion problems that worsened every winter. Her grandfather Michael had tried hay, tried sheep, tried Christmas trees. Nothing held. The topsoil, what little there was, washed away faster than it could rebuild. After the last neighbor drove off with a truckload of hand tools, Iris sat on the barn floor and opened the lockbox. Inside, a leather journal, cracked and stained. A folded soil map of the property from 1967, marked with elevations and drainage patterns in her grandfather's precise handwriting. And a letter on yellowed paper. "Iris, the land is steep but not worthless. What they see as problem, I learned to see as strength. In the old country, we farmed hillsides steeper than this. The answer is not to fight the water but to slow it, to catch it, to make it work for you. I ran out of money and time before I could prove this. You are smarter than I was. The journal has everything. Page 83 forward. This is the method. Do not let them convince you the land is dead. Plant what breaks the clay. Plant what feeds the soil. The mockery will come. Ignore it. The land will speak for you." She turned to page 83 by the barn's failing light. The pages showed detailed sketches, sunflowers, drawn with careful attention to their root systems. Dense plantings, rows following contour lines. Notes in her grandfather's mix of English and Croatian. Root depth measurements, clay-breaking properties, nutrient accumulation rates, biomass calculations. Sunflowers weren't a cash crop here. Nobody grew them commercially in Western Oregon. Too wet, wrong soil type, no processing infrastructure. But her grandfather's notes weren't about selling seeds. They were about soil transformation. The deep taproots, some varieties reaching 8 feet down, could fracture compacted clay. The massive biomass, when cut and left to decompose, would add organic matter. The dense planting would slow water runoff, and the roots would hold soil in place through the worst of the winter rains. 3-year timeline, according to his calculations. First year, break the clay, stop the erosion. Second year, build organic matter, improve structure. Third year, transition to productive crops in soil that had been transformed. Iris drove out to the property the next morning. The hillside was rust-red and barren except for patches of dead grass. The gullies looked like scars, some 4 feet deep, cutting through what remained of the soil profile. Every rainstorm made them worse. She walked the slope, following the contour lines her grandfather had marked on the old map. The incline was 22 to 31% in places, steep enough that conventional farming was nearly impossible, not steep enough that anyone would let it return to forest. The neighbors came within days. Martin Schaefer, who owned 80 acres of grass hay below her property, arrived in a new truck. He was maybe 60, third generation on that land. "You're Michael's granddaughter?" "Yes, sir. I'm sorry for your loss." He was a stubborn man. Schaefer looked up at the eroding hillside. "This land has been a problem for 20 years. Every time it rains, your soil washes onto my fields. I've asked the county to do something. I'm going to fix it," Iris said. "How? You got money for terracing? For retaining walls?" "No, sir." His expression shifted to something between pity and irritation. "Then you need to sell. Consolidate this with a bigger operation that can afford proper erosion control. There's a developer looking at parcels in this area. Rural residential, 5-acre lots. You could walk away clear. It's not for sale. It will be, Schaefer said, when you can't pay the debt and the county fines you for sediment violations. He left dust settling on the rutted driveway. The woman who owned the organic vegetable farm to the east, Susan Martins, maybe 40, with a reputation for good farming, stopped by later that week. She was kinder, but no more encouraging. Iris, right? I knew your grandfather a little. He tried hard. She looked at the hillside, the gullies. This land is damaged. It's going to take serious money and time to rehabilitate. If you don't have resources, the kindest thing is to let it go. I have a plan, Iris said. What kind of plan? Sunflowers. Susan's expression went carefully neutral. Sunflowers. To break up the clay. Stop the erosion. Sunflowers aren't a crop here. There's no market. And they won't grow well in this soil. It's too compacted, too acidic. Iris said nothing. Susan softened slightly. Look, I respect determination. But determination doesn't change soil chemistry. Get advice from the Extension Service. Don't throw money at something that can't work. After she left, Iris opened the journal again. Her grandfather had written a note in the margin of page 85. They will tell you it cannot work because they cannot imagine it. This is not your problem. She ordered seeds in January. The seeds arrived January 11th in 5 50-pound bags, mammoth Russian variety, bred for deep roots and fast growth. Cost: $870, charged to a credit card that was already carrying $4,000 in balance. The county extension agent, a man named Brian Foss, maybe 55, came out on January 19th after Susan Martins apparently called him. He wore Carhartt overalls and drove a white county truck. Miss Kovač, I understand you're planning to plant sunflowers on this slope. Yes, sir. They stood at the top of the property, looking down at the gullies. A light rain was falling, the beginning of what would be a wet week. I've reviewed the soil data for this parcel, Foss said, pulling out a tablet. pH of 5.8 to 6.1, heavy clay content, minimal organic matter, severe compaction below 6 inches. Some flowers prefer loamy, well-drained soil with neutral pH. This is the opposite of their ideal conditions. I know they're not ideal, Iris said. That's why I'm planting them. Foss looked confused. You're planting them because conditions are wrong? I'm planting them to fix the conditions. That's not how farming works. You improve soil first, then plant crops suited to it. I can't afford the traditional improvements. Then you can't afford to farm this land. His tone wasn't cruel, just matter of fact. The responsible thing is to stabilize what you can with the county's cost share program. We can get you barriers and grass seeding, and then consider your options. How long does the cost share program take? Applications are reviewed quarterly. You'd probably be looking at late summer for implementation. I need to plant now, before spring rains get worse. Foss closed his tablet. Miss Kovač, I've been doing this 23 years. I've seen a lot of people try unconventional approaches on problem land. It doesn't end well. Please call me if you want to discuss realistic options. He left, and Iris went back to work. She prepared the seedbed with the ancient rototiller from her grandfather's barn, a machine that shook violently and barely broke the clay surface. The soil was like concrete in the dry spots, slick mud everywhere else. She worked the contour lines, creating rough furrows, trying to follow the pattern her grandfather had mapped. Her hands blistered. Her shoulders burned. The work took 3 weeks. She planted the first section on February 8th, pushing seeds into cold, hostile clay. Martin Schaefer drove by and slowed down, staring. He didn't stop. By February 20th, she'd planted 23 acres, following the steepest slopes first. The remaining seeds went into the areas around the worst gullies. She had $400 left in her bank account. The rain returned February 24th. Not the sideways storm that would come in March, but steady, soaking rain that lasted 4 days. Iris watched water pour down the hillside, cutting the gullies deeper, carrying red clay into Schaefer's fields. On day 3 of the rain, Schaefer appeared at her door. He didn't knock gently. My fields are covered in your sediment. Again, I've called the county. I've planted. I don't care what you planted. Those seeds aren't even up yet. This is the same problem it's been for years, and you're doing nothing real about it. He left. The county notice arrived 2 days later. Violation of the state's agricultural water quality regulations, sediment discharge, 14 days to submit a remediation plan or face daily fines starting at $250. Iris sat in her grandfather's kitchen, her kitchen now, and read the notice 3 times. She had no plan that would satisfy them except the sunflowers, and the sunflowers hadn't germinated yet. She called the county office and got an extension, 45 days to show measurable improvement. The seedlings emerged March 3rd. Not everywhere. The germination was patchy, maybe 60%, with failures in the wettest and most compacted areas. But where they came up hungry. 2 bright leaves pushing through clay. That should have stopped them. Iris walked the rows each morning, counting, measuring, hoping. By March 15th, the seedlings were 4 inches tall, still fragile, still vulnerable, and the rain forecast showed a major system coming. 3 days of heavy precipitation starting March 18th. Susan Martin stopped by the day before the storm. Iris, I wanted to check on you. This system coming is supposed to be significant. I know. Your seedlings are up. I saw them from the road. Susan paused. They're too small to do anything yet. You should consider emergency erosion barriers, even straw bales along the gullies. Can't afford it. Then sandbags. Something. The sunflowers will hold. Susan's face showed frustration, sympathy, disbelief. They're 4 inches tall. They don't have enough root mass yet. I'm sorry, but that's reality. After she left, Iris went back to the journal. Page 91, her grandfather's handwriting. The first real test will come before you expect it. Trust the plants. The roots grow faster than the leaves. What you cannot see is working beneath. The storm hit March 18th at 2 a.m. The rain was violence, wind-driven, relentless, turning the hillside into a cascade. Iris stood at the kitchen window in the dark, watching water sheet down the slope, white in the motion sensor light she'd installed near the worst gully. At dawn, she pulled on rain gear and went out. The water was ankle-deep in places, flowing fast, carrying everything loose. The gullies roared. She fought her way up the slope, slipping in mud, grabbing at grass tufts. Where there were no sunflowers, the erosion was catastrophic, soil peeling away in chunks, new channels forming, clay bleeding red into the water. But where the sunflowers stood, even tiny, fragile, 4-inch seedlings, the water moved differently. Slower. The plants weren't big enough to block flow, but their roots were creating friction below the surface. Small networks holding small amounts of soil. The water braided around them instead of cutting straight through. The gullies in the planted sections weren't getting deeper. Iris stood in the rain, soaked through, and watched the water move around the seedlings like it was learning a new pattern. The storm lasted 3 days. When it cleared, Martin Schaefer appeared within hours. His face was set hard. My bottom field is covered again. 3 inches of your soil. I'm documenting this. The county is coming tomorrow. Iris nodded. Okay. She spent that evening photographing everything. The planted sections where the gullies had stabilized, the unplanted sections where erosion had worsened, the seedlings that had survived. She measured root depth and sample plants. 6 inches already, some reaching 7, spreading laterally as they descended. The county inspector arrived the next morning with Brian Foss. They walked the property in silence, official, grim silence. Documenting with cameras and GPS. Iris followed, saying nothing. Finally, at the bottom of the slope, the inspector, a woman named Reyes, turned to her. Miss Kovač, the unplanted areas show significant new erosion. You're in violation. Yes, ma'am. But the planted areas. Reyes looked at her tablet, then back at the hillside. The gully depth in Section 3A hasn't increased. According to historical data, this is the first major storm in 3 years where that gully didn't deepen. Brian Foss was staring at the seedlings. He crouched down, pushed soil away from a plant's base, exposing the root structure. These are 6 inches deep. They germinated 3 weeks ago. Mammoth Russian variety, Iris said quietly. Bred for deep, fast roots. You only planted 23 acres, Reyes said. I ran out of money for seed. Reyes and Foss looked at each other. Some kind of silent communication passed between them. Miss Kovač, Reyes said, you're still in violation for the unplanted sections. But I'm going to give you 90 days and a recommendation that the county's cost share program be expedited for additional seed and planting. What you started is working. Finish it. After they left, Iris sat on the tailgate of her grandfather's truck and let herself shake. Not quite crying, but close. The expedited cost share came through in 2 weeks, $6,000 for additional seed and soil amendments. She planted the remaining acreage in April, adding lime to adjust pH and a cover crop mix to go between the sunflower rows. By May, the hillside was a wall of green. The sunflowers reached 4 feet tall, then 6, then 8. Their roots dove deep, fracturing clay, creating channels for air and water. The biomass was staggering. Martin Schaefer stopped by in early June. He stood looking up at the slope for a long time before speaking. No sediment in the last 2 storms. No, sir. The gullies are stabilizing. Yes, sir. He was quiet again. Then, I owe you an apology. And I need advice. I've got 12 acres of compacted clay I've been fighting for years. Would this work there? Iris felt something unnod in her chest. Yes, it would work better on gentler slope. I can help you plan it. By July, she was consulting for 4 farms. Not planting for them. She had her own land to manage, but teaching the method, sharing her grandfather's notes, helping them source seeds. She charged $200 per consultation and used the money to pay down debt. In August, she cut the sunflowers. Not for seeds, that wasn't the point, but to let the massive stalks and leaves decompose in place. Tons of biomass falling onto clay that was already softer, already darker, already changing. Susan Martins came by to see it. She walked through the fallen stalks, picked up a handful of soil, crumbled it. This was concrete in January. This is actual soil now. Getting there, Iris said. I was wrong. I'm sorry I discouraged you. You told me what made sense. I just had different information. In September, she soil tested. The results came back showing increased organic matter, improved structure, better water infiltration. The pH was still acidic, but improving. The clay was breaking down. Year 2. She planted a second round of sunflowers mixed with crimson clover and field peas, nitrogen fixers that would feed the soil. The roots went deeper. The erosion stopped completely. The gullies began to fill naturally with caught sediment and organic matter. Brian Foss wrote her up for the Extension newsletter. Innovative, deep-rooted cover cropping for clay soil remediation. The article spread. She got calls from farmers, from researchers, from a soil conservation district in Idaho with similar problems. Douglas County Soil and Water Conservation District hired her as a part-time consultant. By year 3, January 2027, her 42 acres had 18 inches of rebuilt topsoil. The clay was friable. The gullies were grassed over and stable. She planted her first cash crop, organic vegetables in the gentler sections, hay in the steeper areas, and maintained permanent sunflower buffers along the critical contours. On the anniversary of her grandfather's death, she walked to the top of the property at sunset. The hillside was terraced now, not with expensive structures, but with living systems, plants doing the work concrete would have done. The soil was dark and rich. Nothing was washing away. She opened his journal to the last page, where he'd written in shaky handwriting days before he died. If you are reading this, then you have the land. I am sorry I could not give you something easier. But easy land does not teach. Difficult land demands that you think deeper, work harder, remember what others have forgotten. I believe you can do this. I believe the land will reward you. Trust yourself. Trust the old knowledge. The answers are always in the soil. Iris closed the journal gently and looked out over her farm. No longer broken, no longer bleeding, no longer laughed at. Just land, healing, and knowledge passed down. She smiled and headed back down the hillside as the sun dropped below the coast range, painting her fields gold.